16th century vampire in Silesia, from Henry Moore, the famous Cambridge Platonist, 1614 to 1687, an antidote against atheism, or an appeal to the natural faculties of the mind of man, whether there be not a God. First edition, London, 1653. Second edition, with appendix, 1655. A certain shoemaker in one of the chief towns of Silesia, in the year 1591, September 20th, on a Friday betimes in the morning, in the further part of his house, where there was adjoining a little garden, cut his own throat with his shoemaker's knife. The family, to cover the foulness of the fact, and that no disgrace might come upon his widow, gave out that he died of an apoplexy, declined all visits of friends and neighbors in the meantime, got him washed, and laid linen so handsomely about him, that even they that saw him afterwards, as the parson and some others, had not the least suspicion, but that he did die of that disease, and so he had honest burial, with a funeral sermon, and other circumstances becoming one of his rank and reputation. 6 weeks had not passed, but so strong a rumour broke out that he died not of any disease, but had laid violent hands upon himself, that the magistracy of the place could not but bring all those that had seen the corpse to a strict examination. They shuffled off the matter as well as they could at first, with many fair apologies, in behalf of the deceased, to remove all suspicion of so heinous an act. But it being pressed more home to their conscience, at last they confessed he died a violent death, but desired their favour and clemency to his widow and children, who were in no fault, adding also that it was uncertain but that he might be slain by some external mishap, or if by himself in some irresistible fit of frenzy, demoniacal possession, or madness. Hereupon the council deliberate what is to be done, which the widow hearing, and fearing they might be determining something that would be harsh, and to the discredit of her husband and herself, being also animated thereto by some busybodies, makes a great complaint against those that raise these reports of her husband, and resolved to follow the law upon them, earnestly contending that there was no reason, upon mere rumours and idle defamations of malevolent people, that her husband's body should be digged up or dealt with as if he had been either magician or self-murderer. Which boldness and pertinacity of the woman, though after the confession of the fact, did in some measure work upon the council, and put them to a stand. But while these things are in agitation, to the astonishment of the inhabitants of the place, there appears a spectrum in the exact shape and habit of the deceased, and that not only in the night, but at midday. Those that were asleep it terrified with horrible visions. Those that were waking it would strike, pull, or press, lying heavy upon them like an Ephialtes, giant in Greek mythology, or a demon causing a nightmare. So that there were perpetual complaints every morning of their last night's rest through the whole town. But the more freaks this spectrum played, the more diligent were the friends of the deceased to suppress the rumours of them, or at least to hinder the effects of those rumours, and therefore made their addresses to the President, complaining how unjust a thing it was, that so much credit should be given to idle reports and blind suspicions, and therefore beseeched him that he would hinder the council from digging up the corpse of the deceased, and from all ignominious usage of him, adding also that they intended to appeal to the emperor's court, and their wisdoms might rather decide the controversy than that the cause should be determined from the light conjectures of malicious. But while by this means the business was still protracted, there were such stirs and tumults all over the town that they are hardly to be described. For no sooner did the sun hide his head, but this spectrum would be sure to appear, so that everybody was fain to look about him and stand upon his guard, which was a sore trouble to those whom the labours of the day made more sensible of the want of rest in the night. For this terrible apparition would sometimes stand by their bedsides, sometimes cast itself upon the midst of their beds, would lie close to them, would miserably suffocate them, and would so strike them and pinch them that not only blue marks, but plain impressions of his fingers would be upon sundry parts of their bodies in the morning. Nay, such was the violence and impetuousness of this ghost that when men forsook their beds, and kept their dining rooms, with candles lighted, and many of them in company together, the better to secure themselves from fear and disturbance, yet he would then appear to them and have a bout with some of them, notwithstanding all this provision against it. In brief, he was so troublesome that the people were ready to forsake their houses and seek other dwellings, and the magistrates so awakened at the perpetual complaints of them that at last they resolved, the president agreeing thereto, to dig up the body. He had lain in the ground near 8 months, viz., from September 22nd, 1591, to April 18th, 1592, when he was digged up, which was in the presence of the magistracy of the town. His body was found entire, not at all putrid, no ill smell about him, saving the mustiness of the grave clothes. His joints limber and flexible, as in those that are alive, his skin only flaccid, but a more fresh groan in the room of it, the wound of his throat gaping, but no gear nor corruption in it. There was also observed a magical mark in the great toe of his right foot, viz., an excrescency in the form of a rose. His body was kept out of the earth from April 18th to the 24th, at what time many both of the same town and others came daily to view him. These unquiet stirs did not cease for all this, which they after attempted to appease by burying the corpse under the gallows, but in vain, for they were as much as ever, if not more, he now not sparing his own family, insomuch that his widow at last went herself to the magistrate and told them that she should be no longer against it, if they thought fit to fall upon some course of more strict proceedings touching her husband. Wherefore, the 7th of May, he was again digged up, and it was observable that he was grown more sensibly fleshy since his last interment. To be short, they cut off the head, arms, and legs of the corpse, and opening his back, took out his heart, which was as fresh and entire as in a calf new killed. These, together with his body, they put on a pile of wood and burnt them to ashes, which they carefully sweeping together, and putting into a sack, that none might get them for wicked uses, poured them into the river, after which the spectrum was never seen more. As it also happened in his maid that died after him, who appeared within 8 days after her death to her fellow servant, and lay so heavy upon her that she brought upon her a great swelling of the eyes. She so grievously handled a child in the cradle, that if the nurse had not come to his help, he had been quite spoiled. But she crossing herself and calling upon the name of Jesus, the spectre vanished. The next night she appeared in the shape of an hen, which when one of the maids of the house took to be so indeed, and followed her, the hen grew into an immense bigness, and presently caught the maid by the throat, and made it swell so that she could neither eat nor drink of a good while after. She continued these stirs for a whole month, slapping some so smartly that the stroke were heard of them that stood by, pulling the bed also from under others, and appearing sometimes in one shape, sometimes in another, as of a woman, of a dog, of a cat, and of a goat. But at last her body being digged up and burnt, the apparition was never seen more.